I would love to talk about my biggest Angular mistakes and, of course, how to avoid them. So I was doing Angular since AngularJS times. You know, I started with Knockout.js. Does anybody know Knockout.js? Right? So they brought data binding into the web. So I was like literally loving that, and I really wanted to go into this. And then AngularJS came, and I was building an application. And then somebody told me, a friend of mine told me, while we were working at the train station in Zurich, and he told me about the new thing, like the Angular release. And he was like, yeah, I tried it out. It's all components and all components. And he was very excited. And here's a secret. I never told that to anybody. And since it's just us, you know, I can tell you. When Angular 2 was released, I was sitting in the train going to the airport next to my wife because I was on the way to vacation with my wife. And then I scrolled through Twitter, and that was the launch party, and I was more excited for the launch party of Angular than I was for vacation. I never told my wife, so please don't tell her if you ever meet her, right? Okay. So I was literally diving into it, doing AngularJS and doing Angular, and I started doing applications, and I can tell you one thing, when I started, I was a dumb developer, to be honest. So I was literally doing all the mistakes you can do. I was trying things out. Sometimes it worked, sometimes it didn't work out. So yeah, I was trying to, you know. And then I started learning the things. I started to understand the concepts behind it. And then I had more and more applications, which I wrote, which I led teams and stuff. And then I came to a point which is close to now where I can tell you I still am a dumb developer, to be honest. So, because it's a learning path, you know. The more I learn, the more I get to know, the more I know what I don't know, to be honest. Okay? There are so many fields. It's so granular at some point, and it's so fun to dive into this. So you can't stop learning. Okay? So it's totally fine to make mistakes and learn from them, right? The only difference between my dumb ass back then and my dumb ass right now is that I know a little bit more now. Basically, that's the only difference, right? Before we start, let me introduce myself. So my name is Fabian Gosebrink. I'm active in the community. You can reach me on LinkedIn and Blue Sky. And basically, there's a subtitle for this talk is also Lessons Learned from a Developer's Journey. This is like a subtitle. I didn't want to leave this slide out because it's very fitting in my opinion. It fits very well. So yeah, in the next roughly 30 minutes, we will get into things. I have done 3 or 4 things, which I will tell you, which I've done wrong, and which maybe help you in your Angular projects. I have to tell you before we start and dive into it that this talk is very opinionated, okay? So all these things I'm going to tell you are helping me in my Angular projects, okay? They are always like rules of thumb I'm always having in the back of my head. There are no silver bullet, okay? I can't give that to you. They're opinionated, they're helping me, and I like to refer back to them every time I'm lost and I don't know how to solve an issue. Okay? Then I'm going back and remind me of those rules or the things which I learned during my complete Angular way. I would love to hear your thoughts after this. I would love to discuss with you after this talk. Maybe you share some views, maybe you have different opinions, and I would love to speak with you about that. Okay. Let's dive in. I wish I knew about components, right? When we started with Angular, and now everybody's like, yeah, but components, you know, it's one of the building blocks of Angular. Of course it is. What I wanted to know in specific was the relationship of components. This is something I really, really try to do in all of Angular projects because not all components are equal. Okay, so we have on the one side something which is called container components and something which is called presentational components. You name them as you wish. Okay, you can name them however you want to. They're smart and dumb and all that kind of things. But they help me a lot when I come to Angular applications and I face something which is like a huge component. Who knows this? Who has an Angular project with a huge component? 1,000 lines of code or something like that? Yes. I see hands, I feel you, and that's great, okay? So just take a look at this. It's not about what the thing is doing. That's a to-do application, basically. But it's not about what is specifically standing there. It's about there's a lot of code noise, you know. You see that this thing is doing too much probably, right? There's a lot of code in there, and we can't even grasp in the short term what is going on there. So what's being done there, that's a lot. And that component here is doing multiple things. And I showed you the HTML on purpose here. Okay, so it's not about the TypeScript, not only about the TypeScript part of a component, it's about the HTML thing. So look at your HTML. If it's doing too much, you can refactor them. You can just get that like separated and stuff. Okay, you can do a separation of it. So if we do that on this particular component, things are looking like this. So we have a separation. We have now a container component. That's the component I'm currently sitting on. And we're hosting a lot of other presentational components. And we're just passing the data into the presentational components, and we receive events from them, and then our container component can take care of what is going on, basically. And this component here is easier to grasp. It's easier to see what's going on. So we have a header, we have a form, and we have a list. So you exactly know. You can give that child a name, and you can tell it, like you would refactor a function, like you would rename a variable. It's the exactly same thing. Right? Just get the components smaller. They are way, way easier to test and very easier to cope with inside of your application. Okay? I'm sometimes getting asked if I would create a component for things which are not reusable. The answer is, for me, it's yes. You can create components just for the sake of clarity, for the sake of what's going on. Right? So this is really, really important. So what we have a kind of... Come on. It's lagging. Oh, there you go. So we have a container component and presentational component. That's basically the relationship from it. And this is something I refer to in all of my Angular projects. You can also refer to it as like for naming, like a main component or a form component, a list component or whatever. Right? But this helps me a lot when I try to like organize my files and try to bring like architecture inside of my Angular applications. Technically speaking, we're speaking about the container component is taking care where the data comes from. Okay, it could be an API, like a JSON file, it could be WebSockets, could be whatever you want to. And the presentational components take care about how data is going to be displayed. Okay, and when they got something to say, they just throw up events to like their mother component and tell, hey, I got something new. Okay, so if you have any service or any API things, right, you do only inject that in the where component, like in the container component. I always do, it's similar to if you're doing the groceries with and you have a grocery list with like 10 of your friends, and you are the container component, right, you can tell them what to bring, and they bring it back to you, and you could just check it off the grocery list. Right? That's an easy task to do. If you would multiply this grocery list by 10 and give your 10 people 10 lists, and they have to go into the grocery store and communicate underneath each other what they already have, you have many, many communication dots, and it ends up in chaos, because you're getting items 2 times or in no time and stuff like that. So let them tell you what's going on, and you're the one holding the grocery list. We also refer to this as stateful and stateless. The term basically means the same. So you have one component holding the state, and here we are again. We have that state thing. Since we have signals, state is like omnipresent in Angular applications, which I really like. So because you're dealing with state all the time when you're writing Angular applications, right? And the components, the presentational components, also can have state, some kind of state. We've seen the input, which has a state. Also, when you have a form, it has a state. You're changing the value of the form. This is why there is the no state. A presentation component can have state, but it's like limited to that component, like a login form. And when you say login, then everything goes off. Then you tell your container component and your application is really affected by the changes. But if the user clicks cancel, you don't have to tell anybody. Okay, so you're only working in the presentation component. When things go off, you go to your container component. So this pattern really helped me in the way when I want to structure my Angular application. And it also reflects in my file and folder structure, right? So if you have something like this, you really have a container, and sometimes I call it UI, sometimes I call it presentational. Again, you do you. That's no silver bullet, but it's really helping you to organize your Angular application and to grasp a view what is going on in my Angular application. Okay, so if you do more presentational components, they are way easier to test and they provide overview. They're easier to test because there are almost no dependencies on it. Maybe you have a form builder, but your heavy API service with observables on it or something, some communication like, is not even there. And you can throw in, like in a method, you can throw in 3 to-do items and see if they are rendered. That's it. You don't have any dependencies on it. So easier to test, and they provide an overview what is going on. Of course, again, there is no silver bullet. There are exceptions, right? Sometimes you have DP nested, and there's other ways of component communication. It can be a signal in a service or a subject in a service and stuff like that. So there are exceptions, but basically you can fall back to that very, very often. Keep that in mind. Helped me a lot. Let's stay at components and just look at something which is called inheritance of components. Sometimes you have the fact that classes, and we have components. Components are classes as well. Classes can be inherited. So there we go. And now we just do some components inheritance. And this looks like this, basically. So if you want to share logic, you have something like a user-based component, and the logic you want to share, you put in there. And then you have 2 other components, which you're just extending this, and then you can reach to the shared logic, right? I did that in the past, and it wasn't really helping me, especially when it comes to testing. So these are really, really bad testable, so it's really, really difficult to test them. So what we're doing here basically is we're marrying those components very tight together. They're very tightly coupled, and this is not what we want. We want this lightweight component thing, right? So what we can do is we can just take the shared logic, and sometimes they even shared inputs inside of such a base component, which you do not see. If you only look at one of those components, there are input which are coming from the base component, you don't even see them, right? So that's really a problem, and it's not giving you overview, it's doing the opposite, basically. So what you can do is you can just use Angular's dependency injection system, which works pretty well. So you can do a service, put your shared logic in there, and then just inject that one inside of your components and use that shared logic, right? That's totally fine. So now we're coming from this mother-child relationship. We're taking that mother component and put it down, which is just a service, and inject it. So we're using the Angular dependency injection system, which is really, really working well. So if we do inheritance, we have no single responsibility in our components. They're really hard to test, and things are getting really complex because you don't know what's inside of your component by just looking at it. And that's a problem. Okay? Please use the composition over inheritance, right? This feels much more lightweight, right? You can really stick together the things as you want them. Like the composition over inheritance is really, really a good thing, and Angular's dependency injection system works pretty well. So use the dependency injection instead. It makes it easier to read, to understand, and to test the things. And since that, I'm also when it comes to testing, it literally goes easier from the hand than doing some inheritance. The next thing would be code organization, which is really, really powerful. And I would go so far and just call it the beauty of code organization, right? I was showing this to my wife, and she was like, what on code can be beautiful, right? She's not from tech. She's like, what a lie. I was like, no, it's really a thing, okay? So take a look at this, right? For me, how you structure your files and folders, for me it tells a story. Code tells a story. This is more a horror story, but it tells a story, okay? So what we're seeing here is, well, we have folders, we have files, all good, but you can't really grasp what's going on. You can't really see what the developer want to tell you. There has to be some kind of structure. Okay, so this is a bad example of doing it. A better example of doing it would look like this, could look like this, okay? Again, that's no silver bullet. That's just some idea which I have, right? What we have is we have a features folder where we have all the features in it, and inside of the features we have the folders again for the container and presentational components. You can stick to that in the first place if you want to. Maybe it helps. Maybe this evolves. Well, it will evolve. I'm 100% sure. Okay, so you will place a file wrong, which is fine. And when you see the next time, okay, that file needs to go outside in the shared folder, then you just move it. It's totally fine. That thing evolves. There's no silver bullet, and it changes over time. That's totally normal. But when I see like a features folder and I see a shared folder, I know on the same level, I know that everything in shared is not bound to a particular feature. And that's really important. So only by lying a file here, like any service or something, I know it's not bound to a feature, but used by multiple features. If it would not be used by multiple features, the service would lie inside of that feature anyhow like in your file and folder structure as you do it in your projects, right? So this tells a story. This tells why you placed a file somewhere. And then code gets really beautiful when you can tell why you do things and not only what you did. Okay? If you can tell that in your code, in your file and folder structure, that's the top level. Okay? So that makes it easier to follow. It's easier to grasp what's going on. Folders and levels provide information. They tell a story. Okay? And it's more lightweight and scalable, because if you have such a file and folder structure, where would you put the other feature? Well, as the others were lying as well. Just do a new feature folder, and then you do the new feature. Okay? There's no discussion about that. I wish I knew more about state, to be honest. I wish I knew about the impact of state of my application. The thing I learned over the years is that when you write an Angular application, you have to deal with state. There's no way around it. Okay? Depending on how much love you put into it. That's totally fine, right? You can manage it on your way. I'm not saying use any state management systems. That's absolutely not what I'm saying. But you have to deal with state. If you have a property like the counter, which you can increase and decrease, that's state. If that's in a signal, that's state. Okay? And when we want to take the data model we have and just update the UR like we had in Alex's talk, and we want to synchronize those things, that's reactivity. Right? So we have to deal with state. And the only thing we are doing is, in derived systems, we're taking the backend state, reflecting it on the front end. We want to keep them in sync, because if there are 1,000 to-do items in the backend, I would love to see 1,000 in the front end. Yeah, don't think of paging and stuff. But basically, we're trying to synchronize this. And we're trying to synchronize that from our Angular perspective with the template, with the DOM, with the rendered DOM, with the items the user sees. Right? That is particularly what we're trying to do. So you have to deal with state. And state impacts your architecture. It literally does. So sometimes when I don't know how to architect an application, I take a step back and I draw like a simple JSON, right? And I see, what parts do you have in your application? I'm having a dashboard feature. I might be having a profile where I click on, and then I have a lazy loaded profile feature. And then I have something shared, like an authentication thing if the user is logged on or not. Again, this is not bound to a specific feature because every feature needs to access it. So I can't put that in dashboard profile you name. Okay? But these things, dashboard and profile, are lazy loaded, and they're putting into the state later when the user clicks on it. So this is only my state. This is not bound to Angular or something, but I can derive something from this, like my file folder structure, for example. If I'm having a dashboard, maybe I also have a dashboard folder. Okay, maybe there's a feature living on this. If I'm having a profile, maybe I have kind of like a profile section anywhere in my file folder structure. And if I'm having something shared, maybe there's a shared utility which is off. So the state tells you a lot, the application state tells you a lot about your architecture, right? State, dashboard, profile, and also shared out. Exactly. So I'm not saying it's a one-to-one relationship all the time, but it gives you hints, right? State impacts components. We have seen that in my component section before. We have that container and presentational components, where the container components hold the state. They are taking care of, I'm having the 5 to-do items, I'm tracking them in a signal, and I'm passing them down to my components. They do not care about the state. I do care about the state. I'm the one dancing around and manipulating that signal, setting it, updating it, and blah, blah, blah. Right? So container and presentational components goes, you have to think about state if you are making this this difference between container and presentational components. This is also why I also do the folder, because when you create a component, you have to think, what kind of component do I want to have? Right? And this might change. It's totally fine. Okay? Sometimes a component gets presentational, you do more and stuff, only gives you overview. It can make container components listening to state changes. So if you have a state management system, your choice, right? You choose your fighter in that state management game. your container components are only listening to that state changes, like the JSON object I just showed. Right? They're just sitting there and listening to some changes. The business logic, where things are being updated, all the heavy stuff, which is really doing the calculations, get them out of the components. Right? They're just listening. So components are only getting the tool, listening, reflecting the changes or the information you have on the state and passing them around. That's what components should do. Sometimes they're really heavy, having thousands of services injected. They're doing some calculations. They don't need to do that. Everything, every information you do not need to render your template should not belong in a component. Okay? So, less logic in components. That's also a thing I try always to keep in my head, saying, okay, don't blow them up, right? So I have a component here, which is a container component, and I want to mark the business logic in here, which I can't because there is no business logic in it. The only thing this container component is doing is applying actions. I'm using NGRX here, right? But you can use whatever state management system you want. You can do your own. Just take care about that. But this is the only thing my component is doing. It can't get any cleaner, right? And it's only a tool. This component is only a tool to reflect what is on the state. Okay? Also, the routing can impact the state, like I showed before. So if we have the kind of state, like the dashboard, the profile, and the shared auth, maybe there's a dashboard route. So if you have your application and you think about the routing, it gives you hints what kind of states I have. If I'm having a dashboard route, maybe there's a dashboard feature loading. Maybe I need a shared thing now, which could be authentication or something. If there's a profile, maybe I also have a profile route, which ends up in a profile feature, also in my file folder structure, and so in my state. So it tells you a lot. I call that route-based architecture. It's not a one-to-one-to-one relationship. Absolutely not. But it gives you hints, right? And this is very important if we want to design an architecture, Angular applications. And the best thing is state provides guidance. And this is funny because it's non-technical. So what I love, the most successful projects I led with Angular have all used state management. Not because we liked libraries and wanted to install some dependencies. It's not about that, right? It's just about we had a pattern. And when we were a team from, I don't know, 5 people or something, and we could implement all the features the same. We had a plan, right? We were always doing like state management forced us to do it, okay? Let's forget about the boilerplate of NGRX, of the classic NGRX approach. Okay, let's forget about the boilerplate for a moment. Let's forget about all the hate. I don't want to use it. It's like too much and stuff like that. Let's forget about that. But if you want to add a user or add a to-do, let's stick to this example. If you want to add a to-do, what do? You have an action, you have an effect, you have a reducer, you have a selector. If you wanted to delete a to-do, you have an action, you have an effect, you have a reducer, you have a selector. If you want to update a to-do, you have an action, you get the point. Okay? And I was... A story time, that's a true story. I was working at a Swiss bank, and we were having review, my team and me. We were having a review. I was sitting there, and we were presenting all the features, and things were working pretty well. And do you know the number guy? The guy who is like, you have the developer guys, and at some level there comes the number guy. And the number guy is the guy only seeing invoices and just saying, hey, I'm saying yes to that number or no. He doesn't know the value which you put in and stuff. So there's the number guy, right? Mostly it's a boss or something. And there was this number guy sitting in the back. He had white hair. He didn't say anything during the whole meeting. He had a black suit, red tie, and he was sitting there just watching. And my team and me, we were telling him, showing our features, which we did, and he didn't even shake his head, nothing. And when the meeting was over, I was taking my laptop and I was going out. And I still remember I was going the hallway. On the right-hand side were like glass offices where you could see people arguing, having meetings and stuff. And I was walking and trying to grasp my head around the next feature I was going to implement. And suddenly I had a hand on my shoulder from the back. And I turned around and looked dead in the face of the number guy. And he was asking me a question. He was like, hey, can I ask you a question? I was like, yeah, shoot. I mean, what did that number guy want from me, you know? I'm a developer. I was the only external developer there, so why me? I'm external. I'm not even part of the team. And he asked me a question. Why are you the most expensive, yet the cheapest? And I was like, what do you mean? What? And he said, well, you're an external developer. You're the most expensive one when I see the sheets, you know? You're the most expensive. By the numbers, you're the most expensive one. Your team, in total, is the most expensive team. But you always finish projects 2 months before deadline. So in the end, you're the cheapest because we always got budget. We can always go to our customers and pull in all the nice to haves they want to have. And I was like, well, thank you for that compliment. And I really had to think about this. Honestly, I didn't know what I gave him as an answer. But I was going out, and then I was thinking about this. And when I saw this in other projects as well, it was because we had a pattern. We didn't need to discuss about where to put this service because we were using state management, some kind of state management. Doesn't matter. We had a pattern. The developer knew that you have to have an action reducer, blah, blah, blah. The reviewer knew I'm expecting the feature being it like this. Everybody knew what was going on. We had no discussions whatsoever about implementing features. So we were flying through the code. We were flying through the features. It was fine. Everybody knew what to do. You want a feedback form? Yeah, we can do it. It's the same pattern applies. The same testing applies all the time. It was always the same. It wasn't even boring. And that's a good thing. That's a good thing. So I wish I knew, just to summarize a bit, I wish I knew about container and presentation and components. I wish I knew about code organization. I wish I knew about the importance of state, about the importance of state management in an Angular application, whether it's a single signal or like a big application state. But we have to keep the state in mind. It's very, very important. But the most important topic when you want to develop successful Angular applications, I got that for the last point, it's teamwork. So you have to have a team which is like open-minded, discussing, challenging. You can say things without nobody's getting mad at you. You have to discuss, you have to laugh together and stuff like that, right? It's teamwork. That's the basis for all. That's the basis. Otherwise, without this, you can't develop successful software. So why am I telling you this? I'm telling you this because it's a learning path. That whole thing was a learning path. And I learned from all of you in that room, from all your blog posts, from all your videos, from all your talks, from all the chats we have, from all the discussions. It was a learning path. And if you go out of this talk and just take one of the hints I gave you and can make a better Angular project, I would consider this talk as a success. Okay? So Angular or software development is a learning path. Angular is a team sport after all. So let's keep learning together. Thank you very much.